Hey y'all, welcome back to In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is another beautiful day to be in the kitchen. Now, today, I'm going to share with you my master recipe for brioche. Now, we all know brioche. We've eaten it. You've probably bought a couple of loaves at the grocery store or perhaps a local bakery. Or if you're fortunate enough, you have managed to pick up a loaf of brioche in France. But today I am going to show you how to make your own rich, buttery brioche in your own kitchen using basic baking ingredients that you already have. And I'm talking about flour, eggs, lots of butter, some yeast, some sugar, some milk, and turn that into this delicious, rich, buttery loaf of bread that we all love. Now, if you have never tried brioche is called the king of breads, and it is like the top line bread that you can find anywhere. So we all have basic loaves of bread that we like to make, whether it's a basic white loaf or sourdough loaf. Those are very lean breads. They're just flour, water, and salt. Some go a little further and you can add olive oil or butter. You can go a teeny bit further, perhaps add an egg, a little bit of butter, sometimes just a knob to make it more of an enriched dough. But brioche is the top of all the bread categories because you have lean, and then you have like basic, and then you have enriched, and then you have those really advanced doughs. You step over into croissants and brioche. It's all in that more advanced bread category. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be advanced in terms of technique and in terms of your skill level. Doesn't have to sort of think, oh, advanced, I can't do this. Yes, you can. If you've never baked before, if you pay attention, and I don't just mean pay attention to me, but pay attention to what you're doing. Pay attention to the recipe, pay attention to the video. Maybe I did mean pay attention to me. But anyway, pay attention to what you're doing. If you've never baked advanced breads before, you can take basic bread knowledge and translate it into brioche because it's really the same thing, the same techniques, but more in an advanced way. It's like, if you're used to driving an automatic, you know how to drive. You don't know how to drive a stick, but you can get in a stick and drive if you listen to your driving instructor, which in my case would be my dad. Listen to your driving instructor, pay attention. You already know how to drive a car. So now all you need to do is learn how to work the clutch and shift the gears. And that is similar to brioche or any advanced dough recipe. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, I am making a large batch of brioche. But don't worry, the recipe that I will leave for you in the description box below will be a scaled down version for one loaf. Now, the reason why I'm making a large batch is because I want to show you different techniques you can do with one master recipe. So I'm going to make a large batch, but as I say, the recipe will be a scaled down version. Because brioche is a gateway to many other delicious breads. As I said, whether you can use it to make hamburger buns, you can use it to make hot dog buns, you can use it to make a delicious loaf of bread that you can in turn use to make French toast or whatever you want to make that's in the enriched category. Because when you bite into an enriched dough, when it's baked, it's like the butter just sings in a way that if you just put a couple tablespoons in a batch of dough and, it softens the texture, but the butter doesn't sing like it does in brioche. So we're going to be making brioche today. So get out all your ingredients, put your apron on. I'm going to put my apron on, and we will step into the kitchen and bake a delicious buttery batch of brioche. So stay tuned. Now, before we start on the dough, let's talk about the ingredients. Because as I said, the ingredients for brioche is typical, standard but more, what's the word? A little bit more heavy on the same ingredients. Now, for instance, butter. Now, I'm using, here I have 3/4 of a pound of butter. If I was going to make, say, croissants, which are, they're like even more rich than brioche is, but they are more in the pastry line versus brioche is more in the bread line. So, and in France, they would typically be made, and not just in France, but in general, brioche and croissants would be made by two different types of bakers. So you have bakers that work with breads, buns, that sort of things. And then you have the baker that works with pastry, where there would be cakes, cookies, pies, croissants, donuts. Those are two different types of bakers. Now, in my humble status, I am a baker who bakes with both. So I'm kind of like a mishmash of both. But if you were training to be, if you were going for, say, a professional baking position, and you would be interviewed, say, for the bread baker category or the advanced pastry category. Now, both bakers can typically do the same thing. Meaning the bread baker could do pastry and the pastry baker can do bread. So it's not to say that if you learn pastry, you know nothing about bread, because they can do the same thing. But it's the focus of the expertise that makes the difference, because the cake baker, the pastry baker, and large scale bakeries, they typically don't have time to do everything. And then scheduling changes what you bake, because the bread baker can be there all night, whereas a cake baker may only come in for, several hours, do the amount of cakes that they do, and there's no waiting to rise for those things. Whereas a bread baker may have to take over a 2-day period to produce the dough that he or she wants for a particular type of bread. We can use sourdough, for instance. If you've joined my sourdough masterclass, you will know that sourdough has to be started about 4 to 5 days in advance of when you actually want to put a loaf of bread in the oven and bake it and, sit down after 2 hours and eat. That's something that has to be done days ahead of time. You just can't wake up and say, oh, I think I want to bake me a loaf of sourdough bread this morning. Not going to work. But a cake baker or pastry chef, they can very well walk into a kitchen, take out, whatever is necessary in the case of a cake. And then you do have some pastries that are fairly quick, such as puff pastry. It is not a yeasted dough. It doesn't need time to rise. It depends on just lamination of flour, butter, water, and to get that flaky, puffy texture. So, as I say, in the baking world, you would have two types of bakers who would do two different types of things. But since we are baking in our own kitchen, we wear many hats. And wearing those many hats gives us the freedom to be able to bake whatever we want. And we are not restricted. Only by our learning can we be restricted from what we bake. So I don't like to be restricted in terms of what I bake. There are some things that I just don't particularly care to bake. Yeah, it's like, And then there are some things that I absolutely love to bake, even if they are a little bit more advanced. So I always say, and I'm gonna get into the ingredients, but you all know I have to go on my little rambles from time to time. I always say I never shy away from the amount of work or time that goes into making anything if it's worth it. If it's worth me spending 8 hours to bake something, I will do that. If it is not worth it, it doesn't matter to me if it's 30 minutes. If it's not good, if it's not worth it, I don't want to spend 30 minutes working on something that is, is going to be like, yeah, it's okay. If it's worth the time, it is worth the investment, and I feel quite comfortable doing it. If it is not good, I don't care how quick, easy, throw it in this, no. If it's less than, it is not really worth my time and I'm not going to bother with it. So that's the type of baker that I am. And that kind of frees my mind up from feeling restricted about, what I bake. And I go, oh, this is a long recipe. Well, maybe I don't have time for that today, but maybe another day I have time for a more longer, lengthy, advanced recipe. So you can pick your days and when you can do these things, but always, always, always look at the investment. The first time I made a batch of brioche, oh boy, let me tell you about that. The reason why I first bought a stand mixer, many, many, many moons ago, it was because I wanted to make brioche. And brioche is really a recipe you do need a stand mixer. Now, there are very many people who manage to make brioche really well in a bowl with a spoon, and they can do, good. As a matter of fact, Julia Child shared a recipe on her show all about brioche and that kind of stuff. It was about French bread, because brioche is a French bread. And she showed how you can make brioche by hand. But it is a messy venture. And also, if you go to culinary school, they make you make it by hand the first time. So you kind of get you get in the trenches and you get dirty first before you actually can move over to machines. But I am not in a culinary school, and I don't encourage you to try to make brioche by hand. So we're going to be using a stand mixer. But the original reason why I bought a stand mixer years ago, and it wasn't this one, it was another one, was to make brioche. And that was the first time I'd ever made an enriched bread like that. I had made doughs and things, but never to the tune. I remember I was shocked at how much butter. I'm like, oh my, that's almost a pound of butter. Yeah, take a lot of butter. But let me tell you, the first time I bit into those brioche cinnamon buns, it was like, whoa, no wonder why it costs so much butter. Because the flavor of it is not like, and when you first bite into it, the flavor is just, the butter, as I said, the butter sings, and it should sing because there's a lot of it in here. So let's go over the ingredients to make this delicious buttery brioche. Now, the first ingredient, appropriately enough, we're going to talk about is the butter. Now, I am using unsalted butter. And this is American butter, which is 80% butter fat. You can use European butter, which is 85% butter fat. You can use it. And I have a recipe. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel where it's called Let's Chat About Ingredients. And in that video, in one of those videos called Let's Chat About Butter, I go through all the types of butter that you will find at a supermarket, starting off with American butter, European butters, because European butter is not just a butter from Europe, it's a type of butter that is slightly different from our American butter. Now, the reason why I'm using American butter for this is because many of you will probably, if you're in the United States, you will probably use American butter. And if you are in Europe, France, or anywhere else where most of your butters are higher fat butters, such as Kerrygold, which is a very famous brand, not just here in the United States, but overseas as well. And then there are other very famous brands of European style butter. But anytime you see European style butter, it's a high fat butter. Now, in the United States, as I say, we are more of a lower fat butter because some kind of way our food industry was concerned about the fat and calories in butter and all that stuff. And so we end up with a skimmed down fat version butter. But 80% butter fat is good. And I will show you this recipe using American butter. But I like European butter because, number one, this is a European dish. It's French. French butter is highly appropriate for a French recipe of French bread. So If you're in France, bonjour. If you're in France, use a French butter, but I'll be using the American style butter. Now, what the difference it makes is because American butter, and I'm going to be brief because I can be quite lengthy on this, and I talk about this in my Let's Chat About Butter video, by the way, so watch that. And I went into detail there about butter. But the reason why I'm marking the difference between the American butter versus the European style butter, American style butter has less fat, slightly less fat, and more water, whereas European butter has more fat and less water. So more fat, more butter fat means a softer dough, that the butter is not quite so rock hard. If you look at something such as shortening, here in the United States, we have Crisco and other brands. Shortening never gets quite so hard and brittle because it's pure fat. There is zero water content in shortening. And it's kind of like olive oil. If you put a bottle of olive oil in the refrigerator or the freezer, it never gets hard because it's pure fat with no water content. So the more water in butter, the more brittle and harder the butter can be, which is why American butter really always need to be at the correct consistency in terms of temperature before you use it. Now, European butter, because it has more fat, it will always be a little bit more softer, and it will come to room temperature a little faster because there's more fat in it, and that fat softens up faster than our American butter, which has more water. Now, if you're making croissants, which we are not, but I want to go over this really, really quickly with you. If you are making croissants, you want to use European butter because American style butter on its own can break a lot because you're working with a dough that is kept chill while you're doing the lamination, the rolling and the folding, incorporating the butter into the flour. And it will become a bit more brittle the colder it is. Whereas if you use European butter, because it stays a bit softer at room temperature due to the higher fat content, the rolling and the folding is a little bit smoother. So that's why I'm emphasizing on what kind of butter I'm using. Now, if this is your first batch of brioche, don't worry about the butter. It's fine. Use American butter, which is what I'm going to use. But if you want the most authentic, advanced brioche, use European butter. And I leave my preferred brands in that video, so be sure to check it out. Now, for this dough, I'm using bread flour, and most specifically, I am using King Arthur's bread flour. Now, all-purpose flour, you won't be able to work up enough gluten. You'll always have a bit of a very, very soft dough. Perfect if you're making dinner rolls, but not exactly what you want for brioche because this is bread at the end of the day. So I'm using King Arthur's bread flour, which has a higher protein, and the protein is on the bag, which is 12.7% protein. All-purpose flour is 11.9% protein, and then high gluten flour is 14% protein. So you want to use a bread flour for this because you're making a bread dough. So we're using King Arthur's bread flour. We need eggs because brioche is rich in all those rich things. So you need eggs, and these are, I'm using 4 large eggs. You need some milk. You can make it with water, but we're not making it with water today. So we're using some milk, and then I have some sugar. Now the amount of sugar that I am using is because I said I'm making a large batch. But if you were making a small batch, obviously you would be using this much sugar, but the recipe will be in the description box below this video. We also need some salt. And because this is a yeasted bread, we need some yeast. Now I'm using instant yeast. The reason why I'm using instant yeast is because this is going to be another long, drawn-out explanation, but I'll try to keep it brief. I don't want to bore y'all. The reason why I'm using instant yeast is because active dry yeast can really, if you're not interested in getting this done, say in the next 2-3 days, you can use active dry yeast. But if you want to make brioche, say today or tomorrow, you want to use instant yeast. Now, the reason why you want to use instant yeast and not active dry yeast. It's because yeast in itself doesn't really like high fat content things. Butter is high fat content, and so are eggs. So these two things will always slow your yeast down. And if you are using active dry yeast, it's even slower than instant yeast. So if you're using active dry and then you add eggs and then you add butter, your yeast is going to take a lot longer to actually start to working. And your dough will, you'll be looking at it going, rise, please, because it's slowed down by the fat from the eggs and the butter. Now, yeast loves sugar because sugar is, it's a carb, and eggs and butter has no carbs or very little carbs. So yeast loves carbs. Yeast is like me. It loves carbs. So sugar doesn't bother yeast. Milk, not so much. Back in the day when people used raw milk, they would have to scald it because there was a bacteria in raw milk that yeast didn't like either. But since our milk nowadays is homogenized, not homogenized, it's pasteurized, so it's already been slightly scalded. So yeast doesn't mind milk anymore, but it still is not a big fan of eggs and butter. So because we don't want to wait till next week for this dough to rise, I'm going to use instant yeast. That's very important. What type of yeast you use does matter. And as I said, I'm going to add some salt. And because this is mostly a sweet loaf that I'm making, I'm going to throw a little vanilla extract in here. But again, that's totally optional. It's unique to my recipe, but it doesn't have to be in yours. Now, those are the simple, humble ingredients. Let's put together this delicious bread that is fit for a queen or a king. Now, I am using my 7-quart mixer bowl here because, as I said, I'm making a large batch because I want to show you different things you can do with one dough. So this is a large mixer bowl, but if you were making one loaf, you would use a smaller, you just use a smaller mixer bowl, which works very nicely. Now, into this bowl, I am going to add a 1/2 cup of room temperature water, and I'm just going to put that right into the bottom of the mixer bowl. And then I'm going to add in my yeast. Now, most instant yeast recipes tell you to, you can add it in with dry ingredients and mix it in that way and it'll be fine. But I have discovered, and I've been baking with instant yeast for years, I've discovered that instant yeast actually works better if you dissolve it with a liquid, just as if you were using active dry yeast. Because with active dry yeast, you need to activate it by adding it to a liquid. So I'm going to add it into the bowl with just a bit of water, and I'll just swish it around a little bit and give you a glimpse at how it looks. So it's not a pretty sight, but just dissolve the yeast in the bottom of the into the mixer bowl with a bit of water. It's better to use water than it is to use milk for this purpose. So this is the area where we will use a bit of water. Now, if you don't know how fresh your yeast is, you might want to wait and see if it starts to bubble and foam. Then you'll know, if you're not quite sure, you can put a little bit in a bowl and then add a little bit of water to it, add a pinch of sugar, and then watch it. If it turns foamy, your yeast is active. If it just sits there and looks dead and, after 15, 20 minutes, it does nothing, you want to throw that yeast out and get some fresh yeast because that yeast will not activate. But this yeast is already bubbling, so I know it's good to go. And if you bake a lot, your yeast is pretty fresh. So now I'm going to add in the milk. So I'm going to pour the milk in right over that. And in goes the milk. And then I'm going to add in the eggs. And I'm not going to whisk the eggs. I'm just going to crack them right in. So 1 egg at the time. Set that aside. I'm also going to set my butter aside because curiously enough, we're not using the butter right now. So I'm going to put the butter to the back, but it doesn't need to be right up here near me because, as I say, we're not using the butter right this minute. So it needs to wait a minute. Now, next up, we add in the sugar, and I'm just going to dump the sugar right in there. All in one. No need to be fussy. And I'm going to add in that little wee splash of vanilla extract. I like to add it because it kind of complements the butter a little bit. And, oh, I'm having difficulty getting this open. Blame it on that broken finger. Ow. Okay. I think I'm going to have to take other measures to get this open because I cannot open it. No, I can't open it. I broke my index finger years and years ago when I was a teenager. And I'm going to have to come up with some extra measures to get this open because I can't get it open. Great. What's going on? I can't get it open. Why do they make these things where you can't open them like that? There she goes. Oh, great. This finger, it doesn't cooperate all the time like it should, and I can't bend it all the way. So every now and then my index finger, my previously broken index finger, gets in the way. But anyway, thank the Lord, it's not like I can use it, but it's little things like that that sometimes it gets in the way. But for all that work, I'm only gonna add a splash of vanilla extract to this. So like literally that size splash. So yeah, that was a lot of work for a splash, Sarah. Congratulations. Anyway, so a splash of hard-earned vanilla extract into the mixer. Now I'm going to go ahead and start incorporating the flour. So there's nothing mixed in here. Everything is just, it's kind of like an all one and done. Dump them at this point. So I'm just going to start adding in some flour. And you can add in all the flour, or you can add in 3/4 of the flour. I'm going to add in 3/4 of it. Now I'm going to start off with my paddle attachment. That will help me kind of combine and mix all of this together before we actually start kneading. So we've only got a little more than half of the flour in. I'm going to go ahead and start mixing this with my paddle attachment. This is just to get us going. So start low speed. And at this point, you're mixing this just like you would an all-in-one cake batter. This just helps to combine the eggs, the sugar, the milk, the yeast, and the water before we start kneading. So at this point, we're just combining. And it looks like a weird, thick cake batter. Okay, that's good. Now, that may seem like a bit of a waste of time because you say, oh, well, why go through all that? And then you're going to have to take that off and then put an attachment on. But the reason why you do that is because you know all of your ingredients are properly mixed and there is nothing hanging out at the bottom of the bowl. So that's the reason why you start off with the paddle attachment. And then I'm just going to scrape all of this off. And then we'll switch over to the dough attachment. Or now we switch to the dough hook. Because now we've got everything mixed. We know what's going on. Now we switch to the dough hook and just continue adding in the flour. And at this point, you're just working on a low speed. You're just incorporating the flour. Yeah, we're going to get to the salt. We're going to add the salt. So you're just mixing to incorporate the flour at this point. So just keep your speed on low. And then the more flour gets incorporated, the more you can then add more flour. Now I added my dough shield, my mixer shield, because flour is going all over the kitchen. But now it's time for me to add in the salt. So I'm going to add the salt in at this point. There we are. So the salt goes in. That's why you always want to have ingredients on a tray next to you. My tray is now clean. Mine is this little bit of flour. And I know anything, if it was still on the tray, I would need to add it, such as my butter. And my butter is still here, but we're not going to forget the butter. But you could easily forget to add salt or sugar or whatever. Never want to do that. So always keep your ingredients next to you. And then as you're done, take it off the tray. Or in this case, as you use it, take it off the tray. Okay. So we have got all of the milk, the yeast, the eggs, the sugar, and flour, and salt incorporated, and you have this rather stiff dough. It's not overly stiff, but it's not a loose dough, and it's cleaning itself off the sides of the bowl, and that's what you want to look for at this point. You want to look for a dough that cleans itself off the sides of the mixer bowl, and the mixer bowl should be looking very clean. Stop the mixer. This is a very soft dough. It's not sticky. It's not sticking to my fingers or anything. I mean, obviously it's tacky, but it's not like mushing to my fingers. So that is exactly what we are looking for at this point. Now, I still have a bit of flour here, and I'll explain why I'm withholding some of the flour. But let's now finally get to that butter. Now, because I want you to know exactly, because you can kind of, depending on how close attention you pay to your ingredients, you can bake this butter-rich bread in any climate. So whether you're hot or cold climate, you can bake this. If you know the temperature of your ingredients, you can start to manipulate them in order to work depending on your environment. So I'm going to take the temperature of a stick of butter and tell you exactly the ideal temperature. So I'm just going to stick the thermometer right into the butter. This butter is at spot on 72 degrees, which is perfect. Now you can go a bit cooler. You can go to 70 degrees. You can go to 69 degrees. I wouldn't go any lower than 67 degrees. 67 degrees, and it'll be a little bit, it'll take a lot longer for it to incorporate, and it'll kind of just sit on the dough. And you want a butter that will blend into the dough, but not just like melted butter. So I'm also going to take the temperature of the dough itself, which is, okay, I cannot see from there. The dough itself is 74 degrees. Yes, 74 degrees. Now, you may say, Sarah, we're done with the thermometer, by the way. You may say, Sarah, why does that matter? It matters because if the butter is warmer than the dough, the friction from the machine would heat the dough up even more than it already is. If the dough was a lot cooler than the dough would chill the butter down and make the mixing a lot slower. Now, in the summertime, if it's very hot, and this is what I mean by you can manipulate it depending on your climate, hot or cold. In the summertime, if it's a super hot day and your butter is warmer than 74 degrees, you can use the 72 temperature degree butter and then add some ice cubes in here and try to keep your dough at or around 72, 73 degrees. Because the more the butter is melty like when it's incorporated in the dough, you'll get more of you get a greasy textured brioche, which is not what you want. So this sounds like, that's why I call this a bit more of advanced dough, because paying attention to temperature helps you in the long run in the finished product. So as I say, this is the heat of summer or it's a very hot day, add some ice cubes to the dough, just little tiny ice cubes to keep the dough from overheating, because as it's mixing, it's going to warm up, whether the machine or your hands is going to warm up. And you want to avoid a greasy textured brioche. But its temperature is quite mild today, and my doughs are at a perfect temperature, so I'm not particularly worried. If you do notice, say if you added 2 sticks of butter and you notice your dough looks like it's getting a little bit greasy, you can add in some ice cubes. If you don't have ice cubes, you can swap out one of these 72-degree sticks of butter for a refrigerator cold stick of butter, and you can swap out some of it, and that'll help you kind of swing that balance between the dough getting a little too cold versus the dough getting a little too warm. So that's just some tips that I use to kind of help you stay in that range. But I don't think we need to do that today because the weather is just beautiful today and the dough is working out very nicely. And it doesn't always happen. So that's why I tell you that, because it doesn't always happen even for me. Okay, so enough talk. It's now time. Enough talk. It's now time to start incorporating the butter into the dough. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mixer on. I'm going to grab that little spatula back, and I'm going to start adding the butter in a bit at the time. Like this. This is about 2 tablespoon pieces. And I'm going to just drop it right in there. And at first, it'll just become little smacking, squishy smacking noises. It'll do that. And the more butter you add, the more you'll notice it begins to change and it starts to actually incorporate. That'll happen right around the last of this stick of butter. You can increase the speed and then add in more butter. You want to add 1 stick of butter in pretty much in 4 additions. And there she goes. Okay. Let me actually stop and show this to you so I can show you exactly what's going on here, because this is important. So if you notice how the butter has started to break down and how the dough has started to break down into these little pieces here, that is how this entire ball of dough, which was bunched up on the spiral hook, this entire ball of dough will slowly start to break down as you're incorporating that butter. And that's how you're mixing all of that butter into what was this gigantic ball of dough. So let's go ahead and get started on adding in stick of butter number 2. Same thing, add it in 4 additions. Wait patiently between each addition of butter. And then I'll start adding in the last stick of butter. Okay, I'm adding in the last tablespoon of butter. Just let it mix until that last tablespoon is completely combined and all of the butter disappears. Okay, all of the butter is incorporated into the mixture, and I'm just going to take it off and just give you a little glimpse what it looks like once all of that butter is incorporated. So, if you notice, you have this, it's like you see how it's not sticking to my hands at all, and it's not greasy. It's just a very nice soft dough that really isn't sticking to my fingers. And that's good. That is exactly what we're looking for. That means not only is the butter properly incorporated, but the dough is also properly mixed, and it's not a greasy feel. So now we can start to the official process of kneading, because this at this point is mixed, but it's not kneaded enough, because this is bread and bread needs some serious kneading. Now you may say, Sarah, how do you know? Well, for one thing, if I pick up a little piece of this dough, it does not stretch. It stretches, but it also breaks. And you want to knead this to the point where you can get a piece of dough that stretches very thinly without breaking. And this is starting to break. So that's why we're now going to start to knead. And we're going to do that on a medium-high speed. So now we want to turn the mixer on back to a medium-high speed and begin to mix. What you're looking for is the dough to start to, you want it to do exactly what we did in the beginning. When we first mixed it, before we add butter, it cleaned the sides of the bowl completely. That's what we want to happen here, is a dough that gets smooth, and it will turn super smooth. But you gotta let it have the time it needs to knead itself, build up that gluten, and become a super smooth ball of dough. That can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 15 minutes to 20 minutes. You just have to be patient and let it knead. Now, let me address that remaining amount of flour that I have reserved here. Now, this is the point where if you think you need a little bit more flour to help it out, you can add it, which I will do. I'll just add, as a matter of fact, I'm going to turn this off. I'll just add in about a tablespoon or two of this flour. And that's good. Now, why I didn't add it all in here is because even though I have a recipe that calls for a certain amount of flour, water, the weather, all of those things has a lot to do with dough and how it turns out, bread and whatnot. So you may find some days you need all of the flour. You may find some days you need all of the flour and more water or more milk. All of those things change. So even though my recipe or any other recipe anybody writes in the world may say X amount of flour, X amount of milk, X amount of water, but really pay attention to your dough. I can see this dough and I've worked with it enough to know I don't need this remaining flour. That is the reason why you don't add the yeast, sugar, or salt into your full batch of flour, because if you don't use it all, some of your yeast in here, some of your sugar is in here, some of your salt is in here. Well, it would be if we had added it in here. So that's why we leave the plain flour by itself and then add those ingredients into the bowl. So we make sure we get all the necessary things in here. And if the dough is telling you, I'm good, I don't need any more flour, you know, kind of like a kid saying, I'm full, mommy, I don't need any more food, pay attention to it and do what it says. Because if it doesn't need additional flour, don't add it. So I just added those 2 tablespoons. The reason why I added that is because it'll kind of give us a leg up in helping the dough achieve that smooth texture. So that's like a cheat. And it'll help you shave off about 5 minutes of baking. But don't add more than that, because then you just have a lot of flour that you didn't need, and your dough could actually turn to be a little bit tougher than what you want. So once again, we are going to mix this on a medium-high speed for around 10, 15, 20 minutes until we achieve a smooth ball of dough that cleans itself completely off of the mixer bowl. The mixer bowl should look like you washed it when this dough is finished. So let's get kneading. Start out slow. Mix in that flour we added. Flour mixed in, I can take the chill off. And now, go up to a medium speed and just let it mix. Set a timer, just let her go. We have achieved, let me turn it off. We have a beautiful smooth ball of dough. And I'm just going to use my fingers and clean off the dough hook. But as you can see, the dough hook is clean. So if you look at the dough, you see how beautiful and smooth it is. And the sunlight is streaming in so nicely. I don't even need any lighting today. So it's nice, it's smooth, it's soft. It's not sticking to my fingers or any of those things. It's also not, I mean, you can tell it's buttery, but it's not like a greasy, oily dough. You don't want it oily feeling. So now all we need to do is let this dough rise. Now, there are 2 ways you can let it rise. You can let it rise at room temperature, or you can let it rise in the refrigerator. Or you can do a bit of both. You can let it rise for a little while at room temperature, then put it in the refrigerator. Because there's so much butter in here, you want to make sure you watch the temperature of it so it doesn't get hot. Because if it gets hot, it'll kind of spoil the texture and it'll rise too fast. And then you get a dough that rises rapidly, but then it collapses. So just watch the dough as it rises. Make sure it stays slightly cool and soft feeling, or at least if you poke it, because I mean, you don't want to go yanky with it. You're trying to let it rise. But it should stay this smooth and soft feeling dough. It shouldn't become oily or over fermented, because that's not what you want with brioche. Now here I have this is a plastic food prep container, and you can use it for just about anything. But it has a lid, and I'm going to use it to proof my brioche. Now, the structure, because of the size, it helps the dough so it doesn't rise and spread. It rises and it's like wearing a back brace or something. It helps the dough brace itself as it rises. So it doesn't just rise in a spread out fashion. That does matter. But if you have a regular large bowl, you can use that too. It'll be fine. You don't need a square container per se. Lightly, and I mean lightly, oil this with just a little bit of vegetable oil. That's all. You don't want to need to go too heavy, but you also don't want your dough to stick too badly to the rising container it's rising in. And as you can see, this dough comes right out of this mixer bowl without any trouble. So I'm just going to tip it out. Let me do this way. Tip it out, because this is how I normally do it. So this is how I will do it. Come on out of there. It's heavy. This is a lot of dough. Okay, and then I'm just going to fold it into a ball. Normally, I would do this on the counter, but I'm just going to do it like that because round doughs rise better. So just give it a little bit of a knead in like this, and then place it right into the rising container that you're using. Now it's ready to go. You don't need to do anything else. All you need to do is set it aside and let it rise. Now, because this container has markers on it, whether it's 4 quarts, 6, 8, whatever, you can see very easily how your dough is rising, and that will give you a good indication how rapidly it's rising. Because if in 30 minutes it's already up to here, you know your dough is quite warm, whether you have a thermometer or not, and you know my dough is rising very fast. You don't want it to rise too fast because that'll affect the texture. Now, you can put this in the refrigerator, cover it, which is what I'm going to do, the lid on. You can put this in the refrigerator and let it proof overnight and then proceed with the recipe the next day. That is ideal, particularly if you want to get a heads up on making something, whether it's cinnamon buns or hot dog buns or hamburger buns or just a regular brioche loaf. You can put this in the refrigerator and it'll slow proof. And once it's risen to the peak of what it will do, it'll just stop and stay in the refrigerator and stay cold, kind of like sourdough bread. Same idea. And a long, slow rise will give you a better flavor. Same thing with sourdough. The reason why it has that sour tang is because you've let it slowly ferment. If you want to do it today, say if you want to bake this off today, just leave it at an ambient, cool room temperature and let it rise. Because of all that instant yeast, it will rise quite nicely even at room temperature. So I'm going to leave this at room temperature and let it rise. I can monitor it because I see what I started out with. And then when I come back, it should be doubled in size. Now, this is going to take longer than normal dough because of all those rich ingredients, the milk, the butter, the eggs. It's going to take a little bit longer. But it's still, because we use instant yeast, it'll be faster than if we were using active dry yeast. If we were using active dry yeast, I would definitely suggest just put this in the refrigerator and forget it until tomorrow, because it will take that amount of time with active dry yeast. So I'm going to set this container aside in a cool place and let the dough rise.